All right, it's 4:30, calling the meeting to order. I acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. Tla-o-qui-aht notes to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. Notice to virtual attendees to sign up for the public comment and question period using the question and answer function in Zoom. To register, please enter your full name, residential address, and the agenda item you wish to speak to. And through unanimous consent, if there are no objections, I move that pursuant to Section 15 of the District of Tofino Meeting Procedure Bylaw number 1229/2016 is amended, the April 25th, 2023 regular meeting be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. That the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at Musical Hall 380 Campbell Street in Tofino, BC. Seeing no objection, that motion is carried. Before adopting the agenda, I do have a motion to include Section 91E of the Community Charter in the closed session. So I'll make a motion to amend the agenda to include Section 91E of the Community Charter in the. I'll leave it at that for now. Seconded by Councillor Thomas. Any comments? All in favor? That motion's carried. And now, through unanimous consent, if there are objections, I'll move that the April 25th, 2023 regular council agenda be adopted as amended with Section 91E of the Community Charter in the motion to close the meeting in Section 15.1. Seeing no objections, that motion is carried. Now, the consent agenda is rather large. There's two items, 4.1 and 4.4, I believe, where I'm gonna just to make sure that council remove these items from the consent agenda if they want. So a quick note that there is a request for an annual contribution of $10,000 from the Connective Support Society. Now, this was referred to the budget process, but in consultation with staff, due to timing, the recommendation is that it can be included in the 2024 financial planning process. So if there are no objections from council, I'll keep that in the consent agenda. Seeing none. And another comment that in item 4.4 of the consent agenda, there is a recommendation to reduce the annual meetings of the frequency of the meetings of the Recreation Advisory Committee from 9 to 4. That is in the consent agenda. If there are no objections, then I will keep those in and go ahead and read through unanimous consent the motion to adopt. Seeing none, I then, through unanimous consent, recommend that items 4.1, 4, and 7 of the consent agenda on the regular council meeting held April 25th, 2023 be approved and received. Seeing no objection, that motion is carried. Mr. Shortall, do we have anybody signed up for submissions?
Thanks, Mayor Law. Currently, there is nobody signed up for questions. I will do a call to any members of the public attending via Zoom. They can use the question and answer function to ask a question or make a comment. To do so, you need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you're speaking to. I'll do a call for questions now. Calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times, and no questions at this point. Mayor Law.
Thank you, Mr. Shortall. Mayor's report. It was wonderful for this council to host the first meeting with Housage Chief Councillor and elected officials. And we got to, it was a great time. We got to eat together, and I look forward to meeting much more frequently and to work on collective issues. That's it for the mayor's report. We're moving on to presentations and reports. I believe 10.1, we have an engineering service award report. Mr. Rogers.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I have a very short presentation to do with an engineering services award contract. Great. In terms of our strategic priorities, we'd like to develop the new infrastructure required to meet community needs. This engineering service contract will help us get there. The financial impact, basically right now with our engineering services, we take an ad hoc approach. So many of our engineering services work is layered in our projects and also in our operating budgets. One of the intents of making this, surfacing this and providing a contract is to provide a little bit more transparency to the community. Looking back a number of years, we bounce around $600,000 to about $1.5 million annually in various engineering services and costs. It is somewhat hard to find. I spent a couple hours trying to dig down to it, try to get a more accurate information for council. But again, as I said, it's buried in the project costs themselves. It's buried on different engineering firms and also in our operating budgets. The variability you see there, that 600,000 to 1.5 million is based on projects. So basically some years we have from larger projects and those come with larger engineering costs. Again, we're hoping that this provides a more transparent approach for the community and for council. We believe this will provide us a significant amount of efficiencies in our procurement processes to bring things to council sooner and to move through the design build processes faster. And again, we think through this 3-year contract, we'll be able to provide better data for future financial planning. So when we come back in front of council in 3 years from now with a new proposal for a contract, we'll have a better idea of what we're spending and how we're spending it. The background for this award, we actually contracted a procurement process. We expected that one of the firms that we work with quite often may apply, and we wanted to make sure that everything was done in a very transparent and clean process. And again, the idea of this is to ensure that we're receiving high quality, cost-effective consulting engineering services. Procurement, we had the RFP out for about 5 weeks. We received 8 submissions. We had 3 independent evaluators, plus our procurement consultant. We ranked all of the proposals. The 2 highest ranked firms were presented to us in person or via Zoom. And in the end, we chose, or the process, Surface McElhaney Limited as the preferred proponent for this project. In terms of what do we talk about when we talk about engineering services? We're talking about development. So we have a subdivision that comes through the door, our working services agreement. We have it. We send that off to our engineering professionals. Capital projects like the Neil and Village Green project. Operations. So if our operations team or utility team has questions on a day-to-day basis, our superintendent can now pick up the phone and talk to an engineer. Legislation, sometimes we need to adjust our legislation. We'll have some help through that. And then again, just general support, being able to pick up a phone and talk a problem through with a professional. So that brings me to the recommendation that McElhaney Limited be awarded a 3-year retainer contract from 2023 to 2026 for engineering services.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Questions from council? Councillor Steer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. And it just may be my ignorance in terms of the contract itself, and there's not a figure attached, and that might be my naivety of these types of contracts. So how do we know how much we're getting?
Okay. To the chair, Councillor Steer, thank you for the question. And then I think Mr. Rogers indicated this in his presentation. It's a difficult number to nail down for a few different reasons. And I think it's important to highlight that here today in the presentation and discussion. What this contract will mean is that if we have smaller projects that don't necessarily go out to tender, we're able to engage the services of the engineer to help us design that project. The process that we went through was competitive to enter into this 3-year retainer agreement. So at this time, we don't know exactly from year to year how much it will cost. But what council will do once we enter into this process is still have the ability to approve budgets on an annual basis. So there will be no change to that process. So the budgets will come forward and council will decide, yes, we'll go through with this project, we'll go through with that project. What will change though is how we tender engineering services because we've entered into this contract. So if we have a drainage project that council approves the overall budget for, we'll be able to estimate the engineering costs for that project. And then we work directly with that engineer. There may be times where we exceed the threshold of needing to go out to tender for a very large project. And we'll certainly continue to do that to ensure that we do ensure that we have a competitive value. But the contract is not attached to a specific or a minimum requirement on an annual basis. It is to engage the services of the same engineering firm for projects that we're going to carry out on a regular basis. So the budget will be essentially determined by council on an annual basis. I hope that clarifies.
It does a little more, yeah. I'd say it's still a little bit gray, but maybe offline, but it's not huge here.
Yeah,
For my own clarification and understanding of the process, I think I get exactly what you're saying in terms of the budget process and stuff. I always look for a straight up figure.
Yeah. This one is difficult. It's tricky a little bit because we're entering into a relationship with the engineer, and they're determined essentially on an annual basis or over a 5-year term as our budgets are adopted.
Councillor Ambassador.
So similarly, in the unlikely scenario that we didn't have any engineering work at all, how much is it going to cost us? Anything?
We didn't have a which?
If we didn't have a need to work.
Oh, it won't cost us anything.
Okay.
So the contract holds their like their prices, like this is what this person's worth, this is person's worth. We're going to hold this pricing for the length of the contract. So it's just very clean for us to know what the cost is. It's not unlike the process that we currently follow, but it's been a little bit more on a 6-month basis or a project basis, but we're constantly having to go out to do that and then sign a smaller contract. This sort of just brings it all in house and provides, I think, a significant amount of efficiency just to speed things up a little bit.
Okay. I'm used to retainers where you get paid money just to have access to me.
Councillor Anderson.
Is this the same arrangement we had with a former engineering service? At one time we had Quartz Engineering. Is this different than that?
I would say that the relationship is different. I wasn't around for the Quartz Engineering contracts, and I'm aware of them. The process and the approach that we're taking here is that no one's going to hold on to our information anymore. We're going to own all of our information, including actually some of the information that Quartz used to hold for us. So we actually have that information now, and the intent is everything that we would work with them remains ours, and that we can move that in the next contract on to the next engineer. So I don't have the details of the Quartz one, but the relationship is definitely different in this process.
That's the difference I can appreciate. Thanks.
I had one question, but you answered it, but I'm just going to say it anyway, so that maybe it's clear. Is the one risk is the loss of competitive pricing through the RFP process, but it sounds like that was included in the RFP process, was that pricing will be held throughout the retainer.
Of course,
yeah,
correct. And there is a range. I think the EGBC, there is a range that the engineering services offers. There's not a huge amount of variability. There's some smaller things, but it's kind of like architects. There's a range of pricing there that they're sort of committed to provide to municipalities. So,
Councillor Sloan.
Just so I'm clear, does this help alleviate your public works workload? Is it?
It's a great question. It probably makes it easier for Simon's group or Mr. Kirkman's group to work through, because they can pick up the phone and talk to an engineer and a specialty engineer. We have this relationship before. We've had it since I've been at the district with various different engineering firms. This just sort of formalizes it into one group who's got all of our stuff moving forward. So I think it will take some pressure off. But again, this is not something that we haven't been doing already. This is just getting it in front of council and talking about it in an open meeting.
Great, I'm pleased. I think it'll help. Okay, let's carry on there with the recommendation. If there's no other questions or comments for Mr. Rogers.
I can move that the McElhaney Limited be awarded a 3-year retainer contract from 2023 to 2026 for engineering services.
Second by Councillor Thomas, all in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. We have a tender award, Village Green Improvement. Daily.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I will be presenting a tender award for the Village Green improvements and the Neil Street water main replacement. Yeah. A little bit on the project background. The asbestos concrete water main is at the end of its useful service life. The Village Green improvements project address needed upgrades to the Village Green sport courts, and the existing infrastructure for both aspects of this project are in need of improvements. This is the project design for the Village Green sport courts. Mayor and Council, I believe you have seen 80% of the design. Staff has worked with a team to refine the design, and has worked with user groups to include the 4 pickleball courts, with pickleball becoming fastly, one of the fastest growing racket sports. And this design will allow up to 20 users to use the court safely, as opposed to 8 with the original 2 tennis court design. So the sport court widening will facilitate 4 pickleball courts, 1 tennis court. There will be significant asphalt removal and asphalt replacement in the tennis and pickleball courts. There's a concrete ramp that will be going between the basketball and tennis pickleball courts for accessibility. New basketball hoops, there will be benches and tennis and pickleball nets. There will also be a retaining wall added along with angle parking with 2 accessible stalls. The project design for the Neil Street water main replacement, there will be a new PVC line connected to first and third, installation of a new concrete retaining wall, and then sidewalks and curb along Neil Street, and adjusting catch basins for stormwater drainage, asphalt paving, and line painting. So an invitation for tender went out on March 9th, 2023. It closed on April 4th, 2023, and generated 3 bids. Gibson Brothers Contracting came in at $1,457,422.77 plus GST. Hazelwood Construction Services came in at $1,849,323 plus GST. Copcan Civil came in at $2,576,421.10 plus GST. So the low bidder was Gibson Brother Contracting with a tendered price of $1,457,422.77 plus GST. The total budget, including construction costs, contract administration, project management, and contingency, is in excess of the early budget approval of this project, which was $1,709,650. The proposed funding sources for the project are capital and infrastructure levy water, which is $440,700, capital and infrastructure levy roads, $344,487. The previous budget for this was $307,450 in the early budget approval. The capital infrastructure parks projects is $486,200, paid parking revenues $110,000, and resort municipality initiative funds RMI $440,000. This was previously $365,300. So that would bring a total to $1,821,387. So the recommendation is that the Village Green improvements and Neil Street water main replacement construction contract be awarded to Gibson Brothers Contracting based on their submitted price of $1,457,422.77. And that the project budget increased from the original project budget of $1,709,650 to $1,821,387, with the added funding coming from capital and infrastructure levy roads totaling $344,487 and resort municipality initiative funding totaling $440,000.
Thank you. Questions from council? Mr. Staley, Councilor Steer.
I just have a quick question on this has been 25 years, but I'm looking at that chain link fence around the course. Is that part of the upgrades that will be there? I'm seeing a nod over here, but I'm gonna say that is going to be changed.
Through the chair, thanks for the question, Councilor Steer. It will be.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Sloman.
So if I recall right, we're expanding the courts, and then was the wheelchair accessibility not along there, and how is that going to change? So
through the chair, thanks for the question, Councilor Sloman. Yes, so prior what we have now is just stairs down to the courts. So the concrete ramp will allow access for everyone to enjoy the sport courts.
And how, it's just a very small widening of the court. Is that just to tag on to Councilor Sloman's question?
Correct, Mayor Law. It is about 6 feet.
Mr. Thomas.
I don't recall, sorry, through the chair, I don't recall in the original, when this was presented to us, did we discuss using the pay parking funds for this at that time? I'm totally in favor of us using it for that, because this obviously is recreation and it fits what we're doing, but knowing that we have an open house coming up tomorrow, this would be a nice way to say, hey, this is some of our funds are going. Thank you.
Through the chair. Yes, during the early budget approval, a portion of paid parking revenue was allocated to the project.
Awesome. So we'll be able to tell people tomorrow that this is where some of the funds are going. That's exciting. Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Further questions from council? I see none. Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and read the question, read the recommendation.
Once again, that the village green improvements and Neil Street water main replacement construction contract be awarded to Gibson Brothers Contracting Limited based on their tender price of $1,457,442.77 plus GST. And that the project be funded by $440,700 from the capital infrastructure levy water, $344,487 from the capital and infrastructure levy roads, $486,200 from capital infrastructure parks projects, $110,000 from paid parking revenues, $440,000 from resort municipality initiative funding.
Councilor Thomas seconds. Any further comments from council? Seeing none, all in favor? Unopposed, motion carried. We have item 10.3. We have short-term rental business licensing, community engagement report. Is this an online report? Mr. Dick.
Hello, Mayor and Council.
Hello, Mr. Dick.
Hello. I'm actually struggling to start my audio and video. It's I believe the host has stopped it. So Mr. Shortall, if it's possible, so that I can share my screen, that would be lovely. You know, I might be able to share my screen directly here. Give me just a second. Maybe it's just my video is not working properly.
We're working on it, Peter. We may be able to fix it here. We can see your presentation.
It's looking good.
Perfect. How about I just share my screen instead of my face?
We can't see your face.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Hopefully everybody can see the opening slide here that says STR Business Licensing and Community Engagement. A bit of a lengthy title, but I wasn't sure what else to call it. So really the purpose of this presentation and the associated report that was part of the council package is really just to respond to a council resolution from October 11th, 2022. Really what we're looking to do is provide some relevant background information to guide a potential discussion and really an opportunity for council to clarify their desire for community engagement around the issue of short-term rental business licensing and to kind of be around to answer any questions and facilitate the discussion as much as possible. So a brief bit of background. I'm going to kind of mimic the report that was part of council's package through this presentation. Really, both bed and breakfast operations and short-term rental forms of vacation rentals, we typically call them short-term rentals. Even though they are considered different business licenses, they're defined differently in the zoning bylaw. In practical reality, there's very little to distinguish them at this point. And so typically we refer to both of those types of home-based businesses or operations as short-term rentals for brevity's sake. Traditional bed and breakfast operations actually date back several decades to what we would consider more traditional bed and breakfast operations, where you would actually stay in someone's house and actually eat breakfast, usually in a particular spot in their home. Short-term rental operations, as we know it now, where you would nightly rent usually an independent unit, became much more prevalent in the late 90s or early 2000s. They were actually not permitted under the zoning bylaw at that time, not part of the business licensing regime at that time, but they became used largely for people that had summer homes in Tofino and would often rent them out nightly when they were not using them. They were officially permitted in the zoning bylaw through a bylaw amendment in 2005, following some fairly significant community consultation. And then there was also, so fairly widespread adoption of the short-term rental model, really following the launch of online booking platforms heading into the 2010s. So these are things like Airbnb and VRBO. In fact, we often use Airbnb kind of as another synonymous term for describing short-term rentals. And so that's a kind of a very brief background of sort of how we got to where we are right now. Really that official permission in the zoning bylaw kind of set the stage, and then things really took off in the 2010s as operations could be much more streamlined. You didn't need to hire special management companies necessarily to run the operation. The only other thing that I'd like to mention by way of background is that the current OCP does very much seek to curtail short-term rental permissions. Typically through most zoning amendments that we've seen over the last several years, we've looked to remove short-term rental permissions where possible, or otherwise curtail nightly rental permissions in various zones for particular projects. So taking a quick look at our current zoning bylaw, really a lot of the permissions that were introduced in 2005 are very similar to what we actually permit currently. A lot of the language has been changed and clarified, but kind of the core permissions are still the same. In general, short-term rentals, that's again, kind of short-term rental as well as bed and breakfasts are permitted in most single-family and two-family residential zones. I would note that in two-family residential zones, they're only permitted if the dwelling that's been constructed in the two-family residential zone is actually a single-family residence with a suite instead of a duplex. They are also permitted in very particular multifamily zones. This would be the Fred Tibbs building as well as the Ike Street development. They are currently considered a home-based business, and they generally have to conform to any relevant regulations within Part 4 of the zoning bylaw, which is the area that regulates home-based businesses. So some of these considerations are, a maximum of 3 bedrooms or 6 guests at any one time. The short-term rental must be in an independent dwelling unit, whereas a bed and breakfast occupies a part of a single unit. A short-term rental and a B&B can't be operated simultaneously. And there's a variety of other kind of specific regulations that must be met in order to be in compliance with the zoning bylaw. One thing that is worth pointing out, though, is that short-term rental operations are not subject to the 40% floor area restriction that is common for most home-based businesses. So if you were to run say a chiropractic office, or you were an artist having a showroom, you would not be permitted to use more than 40% of the floor area of your home to operate that business. Short-term rentals are not restricted by that, and so can take place in a very, the main part of a dwelling, which allows some fairly significant short-term rental operations that we see around town. Taking a quick look at the business licensing bylaw, really what the business licensing bylaw does is fine tune some of the regulations that are part of the zoning bylaw. So within here, this is where we kind of find the requirements for either the owner of the property or a long-term tenant to be present on site when the operation is operating. There's a requirement for distribution of a particular neighborliness brochure, pardon me, that's produced by the district and updated by the district fairly regularly. There's also sort of a matrix for determining the number of permitted guests by the business license inspector and a few other small details of that nature. So all of these requirements, including our requirements in zoning license, the zoning bylaw, pardon me, must be met prior to the issuance of a business license. Enforcement actions typically take place through the business license inspector and other protective services staff, that is our bylaw enforcement officers. One thing that I really just kind of wanted to talk a little bit to council about is this idea of legal nonconformity, as it's a bit of an interesting quirk to the discussion around how we might further think about regulating short-term rentals or looking to curtail them, as is proposed in our official community plan. So existing conforming short-term rental operations are really protected from any future bylaw changes via provincial legislation. That's the Local Government Act. So what this means is that if there is an existing short-term rental or bed and breakfast operation, or really any other business that's operating in conformance with the current zoning bylaw, as well as the current, business licensing bylaw, should council decide to change either or both of those bylaws, that actual business would be allowed to maintain its current status and continue operating as it is. This makes it challenging to stop existing operations, as most would likely continue to operate just as they have been, even if the zoning or business licensing bylaws are changed. The only time that non-conforming status is essentially lost is if the particular permission that is considered non-conforming has not been used for a period of 6 months. So what we do, we kind of consider within the context of short-term rentals, is that we consider business licenses, as a proxy for use. So we're not necessarily checking if there are actually people coming in and out and staying, night to night within your residence as a business owner. We say essentially, if you do have a valid business license, then you are taking advantage of that use that you are permitted to do. Current licenses, currently staff understand there are approximately 268 business licenses issued. That number was a couple weeks old, so it may have fluctuated slightly up, but it's within the realm of 268 business licenses issued for short-term rental operations, totaling 587 beds for nightly rent within the community. It's estimated that within the District of Tofino, we have about 755 legal parcels with short-term rental permissions. It's worth noting that many of these are actually not built out. So they may be parcels that exist within the District of Tofino, but they likely do not actually have physical homes on them or places where people live. They're probably what we would consider undeveloped lots. However, taking these numbers, we kind of end up with approximately 35% of the total 755 legal parcels are using short-term rental permissions. Again, that could be a slightly misleading stat based on the fact that the 755 legal parcels could not all be converted to short-term rental operations tomorrow, as many of them are undeveloped, but it is kind of a worthwhile consideration in that it's not an overwhelming majority of the legal parcels that are currently using STR permissions, but it is a significant portion of them. And of these 268 licenses, 95% are registered to BC owners and 62% are registered to Tofino owners. So well over half of the licenses are held by Tofino addresses. I should say perhaps not owners is the best word there. Addresses, they're licensed to a particular Tofino address. So the other aspect of the motion that was made last fall talks a little bit about the need for community engagement. Within the council report, staff decided to use the International Association for Public Participation spectrum for guidance, or just kind of an overall framework for how to think about community engagement. and ended up sort of imagining some of the engagement activities that could include surveys or public information meetings, public workshops, and perhaps even a stakeholder advisory committee for a little bit more in-depth consultation with particular members or stakeholders within the community. One of the things that is a little bit uncertain at this point is the scope of the engagement. It's very helpful for staff to kind of understand what it is we're trying to do, what the information is that we're looking to get, and that helps us guide potential community engagement activities and timelines. So that's something that would be potentially worthy of further council discussion to refine the motion that was made last October. The other thing that I would like to note is that we are in the process of very slowly getting into the process, I should note, of reconsidering our zoning bylaw. And I anticipate that short-term rental discussions will be a very important part of this review. We're hoping to begin this review later this year, and it will likely continue well into 2024. However, it's something for council to be aware of as these further discussions on short-term rentals will no doubt come up during that process as well. So that brings us to the end of my presentation. I'll be trying to share my screen so I can answer some questions, or pardon me, stop sharing my screen and get my video working so I can answer questions, as I'm sure there may be a couple coming. So thanks for your time, and just bear with me while I try to get my camera working here.
Super. Thank you, Mr. Thick. So we're going to open it up to council for questions for clarity, and then we'll save the debate for a second round of council comments. Is that okay? So we'll get through questions for clarity first. Should we? We'll see if we can see your face, Mr. Thick. Otherwise, we'll talk to the voice. We're not in a hurry. Oh, there you are. Great. It's an improvement.
Thank you. It is working.
Questions for clarity for Mr. Thick. I have one. Nobody else is jumping forward. We have in your presentation. It said there was 755 parcels. Now that's not the total number of homes in Tofino. That's the total number of units that have the STR possible. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question, Mayor Lau. That's correct. So the total amount of homes in Tofino far exceeds that. This is just the legal parcels that exist within Tofino that have the zoning that would permit short-term rentals to occur on them. So many of these parcels, as I noted, may not be developed, or they may not be appropriate for short-term rentals for whatever reason. But that's based on our somewhat limited GIS information. That was kind of what I was able to glean. It would be, my understanding, I could be incorrect about this, but my understanding is we don't have a very great cross-reference, between our building database, our building permit database, and our zoning that's contained within our GIS system. So it's actually fairly labor intensive to understand exactly which STR license is attached to which building, which is attached to which property with which zone, and to kind of cross-reference all those is fairly labor intensive. It has to be done manually. And so for the purposes of this report, I kind of just gathered up the entire amount of legal parcels that have the STR permission through various zones that they might have on them. But as I noted, not all of those parcels are developed or have buildings on them.
Super. And I have a follow-up question just for clarity. A parcel is one unit. So Ike Street, the Ike building would have multiple parcels, as would Fred Tibbs.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, that's correct. So those would be those are essentially what we'd consider a strata subdivision. So those are strata titled lots. Those do count as individual parcels. When I say parcel, all I'm saying is it's a lot. So it's a discrete piece of property. Perfect.
That was for clarity. Councillor Steer.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm going to try to phrase the question that makes sense. In the report, it talks about, and you've indicated that the zoning bylaw review will be this year. And within the report, you've talked about the potential for the relevant bylaws changed in a manner desired by council to limit extinguish STR permissions. Within that review of those bylaws, would those particular bylaws be identified for council? And then I think what I guess I would be grasping for is what possible options would be available to limit, quote, limit, extinguish those SDR permissions. Does the question make sense, Mr. Thick?
Yes, through the chair. Thank you for the question. It does make sense. I'll do my best to try and answer it. So the zoning bylaw sort of rewrite that we're anticipating to start later this year and carry on to 2024. I don't want to speak out of school in any way, but I'm kind of anticipating that short-term rental permissions will be something that council is taking a fairly close look at, given that our OCP is not very supportive of further nightly rentals, particularly in residential zones moving forward. Typically a zoning bylaw is based off of what an OCP says. So we'll be looking to likely review what's currently permitted for short-term rentals within the zoning bylaw. Again, the challenge here is the legal non-conforming protections offered by provincial legislation. So even if those zoning bylaws, business license bylaws, any other relevant bylaws are changed by council, say council decide to snap their fingers and say, all right, there's no more short-term rental permissions of any kind permitted within the District of Tofino, the existing businesses will be able to carry on through that provincial exemption, or I shouldn't say exemption, through that provincial permission indefinitely, as long as they continue to hold business licenses and did not let their business license lapse for a period of 6 months or more. So to answer kind of the second part of the question, which is what options do we have, pardon me, to limit short-term rental permissions? Currently, our options are to be candid, very limited. I don't know that we have much legal authority to compel existing conforming businesses to change their way of doing businesses or to oblige them to no longer operate. This is something that I've been hoping to look into a little bit more with some legal advice, but our kind of preliminary legal advice around that is that it's very challenging to use the zoning bylaw or the business license bylaw to restrict a permission that's already been granted, particularly for a number of years. So while this is kind of an ongoing concern within the District of Tofino, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle, I guess, to put it somewhat candidly.
Well, please, yeah, through the chair. And so in terms of the, and I fully understand that the existing use by legislation would be continued in that legal non-conforming, but what this potential ability would be to limit any new growth in that area. So we would actually have a tool to be able to use to limit further growth. And I don't know, something as drastic as removing that permission from the zones that are currently allowed. And that would at least stop any potential new of those 755 legal parcels from being able to utilize the current permissions that are allowed.
Through the chair, that's correct. And I kind of used the example of extinguishing all the permissions with the snap of a finger as to be a little bit dramatic. I don't expect that to happen anytime soon. Yeah, so changing these bylaws, what would happen would be anybody who currently has the permission to operate a short-term rental or a bed and breakfast, but has not taken advantage of that permission by pulling a business license, they would not be permitted to do that moving forward, depending on of course, council's decisions around short-term rental regulations moving forward.
Thank you. Councilor.
Question through the chair. When a legally operating, currently permitted parcel changes ownership, would the permission expire with the change of ownership, or would it continue over if this change in bylaw was to be pursued?
Through the chair, my understanding is that we kind of consider use to be through a business license. So typically, when a property changes hands and a business changes hands, they would have to renew their business license. However, because unless there was a gap of 6 months or more within that business license renewal, the legal non-conforming protection under the Local Government Act would be afforded to the new owner as well.
All right, thank you.
Can I have a follow-up question before I go to you, Mr. Anderson, or Councilor Anderson? Yeah. Just because it's following on that, Mr. Thick, if the business license requirement stated that in order to run a short-term rental, the operator had to be a primary resident owner. Would that then prevent a new owner who wasn't, say, it wasn't their primary residence from operating that business license or that business?
Thank you for the question. I'm not 100% sure of my answer, so I might have to follow up. But my kind of instinct tells me that again, we're considering a legal non-conforming use, and so previously that use would have been permitted. So say somebody sells a property tomorrow, and the new person comes on, and they decide that they would like to pull a business license, and they're allowed to do that under our current bylaw regime. And so that existing use is operating under our current bylaw regime. Moving forward, should those bylaws be changed, even though the bylaws have changed that, and that impacts the shift in ownership to a certain extent, the use is still operating under our current regime. And so the new owner would be essentially buying or kind of taking over, absorbing that use, as opposed to necessarily having to conform with the current and existing bylaws. They would still be working under any new bylaws that may be changed, as you're suggesting, they would still be essentially operating under the old bylaws. That being said, I don't know if that's 100% the truth. So that'd be something that I would like to follow up with our legal counsel, and I can get back to you on about that.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, my question, I don't think it was covered in the report, but if STR is operating out of compliance with our regulations around that, and don't meet the requirements of the business license, or don't have a resident or owner on site, is it possible to remove those permissions from the zoning if they're not compliant, or would it be a case of they'd have to be out of compliance for 6 months, basically?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. I might just have to think about that one for a second. I would say legal non-conforming, for something to be legally non-conforming, it has to be conforming prior to it becoming legally non-conforming. So if something is non-conforming now and then is non-conforming following a bylaw change, it continues to be non-conforming and does not enjoy the kind of permissions that legal non-conforming status granted. That being said, in practical reality, sometimes it's difficult to prove when a particular property was conforming or non-conforming. So for example, maybe 5 years ago, they received a business license and were deemed to be in conformity. Then 2 years ago, they stopped operating in conformity, but have somehow not been caught by our business license inspector or bylaw services at this point in time. Bylaws are then changed, and then the bylaws oblige them to operate make them non-conforming further. We would, as a municipality, have to go back and prove that they were non-conforming prior to the bylaw changes, and then prove that they are again non-conforming after the bylaw changes, in order for us to be able to successfully remove that permission. So it is possible, and it is certainly something that we would look to do. But there are certainly enforcement challenges around that are coming to my mind immediately.
I'm just wondering if it's possible to put the onus on the license holder to prove that, and not have the district be responsible for proving that.
Again, yeah, through the chair, that's typically what we try to do when somebody claims legal non-conforming status, is we ask them to prove it to us. However, I suppose my concern would be, should they be non-conforming? Trying to think of the best way to kind of illustrate this, but essentially, if they were granted a business license, again, we'll say 5 years ago they were granted a business license. Our business license inspector usually doesn't have the bandwidth to inspect every single of the 270 or so businesses that operate either bed and breakfast or short-term rentals every single year. So their business license may have continued to be issued even though they are operating out of conformity, because they just weren't caught essentially as operating out of conformity. So this is where it gets tricky is for us to prove that to stop issuing a business license and prove that they're operating out of conformity, then have them operate or not operate for that matter without a business license, and then change the bylaws, at least so that they don't have a business license, issued business license for at least 6 months. Then we would be able to say, okay, well, clearly it's a case of you can't claim legal nonconformity at this point. The challenge is they may be operating out of compliance, but according to our records, they are in compliance. Because they have a issued business license, because something was missed during the business license process, or they've changed something in their layout and they didn't note that on their application, and the business license inspector was unable to physically go and confirm every aspect of their application. So that's kind of the difference, is they may be operating out of conformance. However, according to our records, we may not know that depending on the situation. So a bit of a convoluted answer, but hopefully there was some sense in there.
Maybe a question following on from Councillor Anderson's is if we change the bylaws, there's a business operating in legal non-conforming status, but then there's complaints and the bylaw finds them in contravention of the business licensing regulations. Say they have 12 people in, it happens 3 times. And say we remove their business license through the bylaw process for 6 months. Now, then would they then lose their legal non-conforming status, or would that be a legal nightmare?
Thank you for the question. I believe in that situation they would lose their legal non-conforming status. So if there was perhaps some addition to the bylaw that noted that should the operation be found out of compliance with the zoning bylaw, lose their business license, they'll be unable to reapply for a business license for 6 months or for the rest of the calendar year, or so be it, whatever council decides. That could be an avenue to slowly remove some short-term rental permissions. Again, I would be cautious about recommending that or saying that it's possible. I don't know the legality of including those kinds of clauses within our business license bylaw, but it's certainly an idea that staff would be happy to look into.
Sure. It would certainly quiet down a lot of overly loud short-term rentals. Anyway, okay. Seeing no more questions for council, would council like to make a comment on this? This was a significant topic for the previous council, and thus which led to 2 reports back to council, this being one of them. So, Councillor McMaster.
Yeah, I'd agree with the presentation. The more I've learned about short-term rentals and what's happening in Tofino, and attending the conference the other week, our powers to control short-term rentals in Tofino are limited, almost non-existent. So it makes me think we should be looking at our business licensing. So my question to staff is, when are we supposed to be looking at business licensing and fees?
Sorry, Councillor.
Thanks.
Tatiana.
Through the chair, Councillor McMaster. I don't have an answer to that, but I'd like to get a better sense from council about what council may want staff to look into with respect to the business licensing bylaw. If it's strictly fees attached to short-term rentals and having a look at that, that's something we can revisit. It would be good to have some direction from council.
We've talked around the table in the past about business licensing should cover the cost of regulating or policing short-term rentals. For instance, the cost of software and things like that, and bylaws. So are we any closer to having an idea of those costs? And can we apply that to the business license fees?
I may, thank you through the chair. I think it would be good to provide some information to council on how short-term rental enforcement has been going. We do have some statistics we could probably bring back in that regard and then compare that to what the overall cost of enforcement is compared to business license fee collection. So that's something we can't answer today, but certainly something we can bring back.
Okay. The point is if business is here to stay, we may as well look at trying to get some change out of it.
Okay, we'll look forward to hearing back from staff, but for zoning. So the question is, do we change some of the just for council? Are we changing some of the zoning parameters, allowances for short-term rentals? As far as no more permissions for any zoning or other things, pulling back on who's allowed to run a short-term rental and who isn't. So that's part of the question. So I think that's what, and also the other point that we're being asked is for public engagement, how much public engagement, what type of public engagement, where is council sitting on what they intend to do. The previous council was pretty had a pretty strong, I think, position, but this council we don't know. So that's kind of what we're looking for now. Hopefully, a little direction for staff on those two things, and it may be as simple as council saying, "This is what we want to do. This is an idea that we all have. Let's do it." But I mean, that could be there soon. So, Councillor Thomas.
Through the chair, I'm largely in favor of changing the bylaws so that it's primary residence, so that people are, if they have a secondary suite, they can do that. And it means that it is people that are in the community and not absentee people. And I think it'll help with places getting quieter. I've got lots of opinions about why, but I'm really in favor of that for sure. And I think community engagement, I guess we can do our talk to Tofino, and maybe before we change it, we'll probably want to hear from people that do run short-term rentals in town in some capacity. I'm just not sure how we would engage them in that sort of sense, because it is just, obviously everybody has opinions about it who isn't running one, but I do know there are obviously people in town who do run them as well. So it could be a valuable input on things.
Okay. It'd be good to have council's feedback. So I'm going to look for every councillor to say something here for staff to hear. Councillor Schulman.
Well, I think it would be good to have a fair amount of public input, because as we saw, 62% of them are owned by residents, and that's gonna impact people, our decisions. And yeah, I think it's, I mean, I feel like maybe it would be interesting to look at like how complaints are accepted within our community, like at the district level, because I do know that there's quite a few illegal ones operating that aren't conforming, so it'd be good to get them off the table before we proceed with the decision. That makes sense.
I think, but I just want to make sure that we're just so we're enforcement of illegal short-term rentals. Let's this is my comment to council. Let's stay away from that, because what we're looking at is the zoning and permissions, and we can deal with enforcement of illegal non-conforming properties in a different conversation. We just what we're allowed, and we can always enforce.
I think my input in then is, yeah, I'd like to have a fair amount of public input, because I think this is going to hit people pretty close to home.
Okay. That's Sawyer.
Sorry, I think Councillor Anderson might go before me. No, okay. I would be in favor of looking at addressing the zoning and permissions in this fashion, because it would be not punishing those who are operating legally conforming suites. It would just be limiting the amount of new STRs being created, especially for our limited landmass for residential occupation, as well as our water, which we've all been talking about. And obviously bylaws and things are future conversation. As far as public engagement, I would like to see a really strong lead on the conversation being about this would not impact current legally operating short-term rentals. I don't want people to panic and think that everything is going to get shut down. And that's my take on this.
Okay, Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, I guess the goal really is to limit, curtail, or remove permissions. Or all of those things, possibly, maybe more. With the goal of non-expansion of short-term. So I think that the council needs to come to agreement that that's really what we're doing. So we have to have a shared goal here, an end result. How to go about that is the next part of the process. Certainly, public engagement is going to be a component of, but how to do that. We arrived at the permissions for many residential zones being put into place 2005, I guess it was. There was a committee struck. I can't remember exactly the composition of the committee, but I think it brought in some short-term rental operators' interests as well as some council members and so on. So that's one process. Another process is through the review of the zoning bylaw. And that's going to be a much longer process and more broader in scope. Might be a better way of doing it. Just because of that, looking at the whole picture and not just focusing on short-term rentals. So, you know, through a series of either committee meetings or open houses, talking about the zoning bylaw, presentations to the public, much like the OCP process or something like that, showing maybe where these zonings exist, where they're used, where they're not used, where they can't be used, where they're that kind of examination, I think, needs to take place. That kind of thing might be better through that zoning bylaw review. I don't think we can talk about this really though without bringing the enforcement part into it and the business licensing part into it to some extent as well. Because part of the failure, I think, with our current zoning bylaw is that we're not able to enforce it as well as we like. And had some of the goals in that been reached, i.e. having residents on those properties, I don't think we'd be quite as facing the same kind of problem as we're facing now. I think it's the non-compliance part of short-term rental use is an additional burden on top of the burden we bear just of over occupancy or just the added number of accommodations that are in place and potentially replaced with another number of those 700 or so lots that would allow us. So I think those are the kinds of questions we're looking at, is how to achieve that whole public process, and then how to approach the whole issue, whether from that broad scope within the zoning bylaw thing and a longer process, I would say, or just sort of a one-off kind of targeted approach, so which would be quicker, but definitely be able to weigh out those residential, different types of residential uses, weighing them out against each other in a broader scope. That's what I thought.
Councillor Steer.
Thank you, through the chair. I would agree with Councillor McMaster in terms of our looking at what our abilities are, and I would go back to which are limited, and as Mr. Thick has pointed out, I would go back to one of the original intents of looking at the question back in the last council, as Marilyn referred to, and if I remember correctly, two of our goals was to potentially increase housing stock and to limit the disruption to the residential neighborhoods where those permissions were allowed. And so with that in mind, looking back and looking at what tools are available, I would be very much in favor of looking at the relevant bylaws that we would be able to change in a manner desired by council to limit or extinguish STR permissions moving forward. The expansion of, we certainly know that we can't retract what is already there, as was pointed out by Mr. Thick, but we have some tools that I think would allow us to look at any further expansion in those areas. So very much desired to look into those relevant bylaws for us. The other part that, and I will touch on enforcement just because the question came up. I would look to staff when they had the potential to look at what resources would be necessary to effectively and to have a rough understanding of what would be necessary to enforce the bylaws that were there and what the costs would be associated, which would help inform those reviews of the fees that we would associate, the business licensing fees that we would associate with those STRs. So if we understood what the costs were, then we could apply those directly to the cost of enforcement. Those are the big ones. And then in terms of engagement, I will admit I'm unclear about what the purpose of the engagement process with the community would be. If we are going to communicate, we have to be clear about what information it is we are asking of the community. What is it we want from the community to give us? So there has to be a clear scope for that communication, for the information that we'd be requesting of them. And we need to give, if we are going to proceed, clear direction to staff on the goals for those communication for the consultation with the community. And I'll leave it there.
Councillor Thomas, yeah.
I guess to what Councillor Steer is saying about community engagement, we probably don't need to like call on engagement now. We probably, once we start to actually look at, hey, we're changing the bylaws and this is what we're intending to do, that might be the time to draw people in. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. My question I can hear for council is that we're looking at whether or not to change them.
Yes.
Right. So we have to give staff an idea of where we're going. Do we want? We do want to change them. We do want to start restricting short-term rentals. How do we want to start restricting them? So there's some options. For instance, restricting the operation to resident-owned owners. So they have to live on the property in the house. They can run a short-term rental, which seems to make some sense. Down here. You want to talk after? You got a comment or what?
Just a really quick point, or to add into that would be also the 40% floor space allotment that other home-based businesses are subject to. I believe would be, if you're looking at changing things so that, you know, the owner has to be present on site, that would also be an interesting tool.
So these are the kind of questions I think that we would like, if we're going to go with community engagement, and say, hey, this is where council is leading, this is parts of the things that we're discussing, and then start to get feedback from the community on those specific things. That would kind of be that's my thinking. I don't think it's that I don't think it's that difficult of a project to do, but anyway, and it's been going on for a while. This conversation is going on for a while, and I think some of the tools that we have and the decisions we make are not that super difficult if we want to make some changes. So you know, I don't really want to wait till 2024 to sort of make changes, my personal opinion, but
that's not going to affect the existing short-term rentals.
It won't affect necessarily the existing short-term rentals, but in the next year and a half, You know, basically people can, you know, buy a house, apply for a business license, and whether or not they run a short-term rental, they have now legal non-conforming status. So, you know, there's potential for a run on you know, short-term rental business licenses, which is something we have to actually factor in. So the idea here, going back to Councillor Steer's point, is the idea is that we're protecting residential properties without harming people who live here, who rely on their, maybe a short-term rental for their livelihood in order to own their home. So that's my opinion. So there's only a few things we can do. Really, there's like a couple things that we can do that are effective. You know, Councillor Steer.
Yeah, and if I'm correct, and I know Peter's probably still listening, one of the relevant bylaws is that we could potentially look at removing the permissions from the zonings that is currently allowed. We could be looking at taking that out. We don't have to do the review. We can say council was giving direction. We want to look at the relevant bylaw and remove those permissions from the zoning that is currently allowing that to happen.
That's right. Yeah, we could do that. So those are a couple things, you know, we could totally do. So remove them altogether, or allow short-term rental with owner occupied, or under 40% of the household. These are real things that we can do, and then we can enforce them. Councillor Anderson?
I mean, I think we need some a bit of legal advice before we just downzone effectively. So I mean, if we want to do something immediate, I think changing the, again, with legal advice, changing the to an owner operated model rather than a tenancy type model, or would maybe create a small run on people looking for business licensings to get into the non-conforming, legal non-conforming potential, should bylaws change. So there's a bit of legal challenges with some of the ideas around the table.
Councillor Steer, and then I think Ms. Etienne had a point. Do you want to do that?
I was just going to quickly comment. You could do both, though. I suspect
you could do both.
Yeah,
but you're more open to challenge and possibly financial compensation for owners that you're downzoning.
I don't think we're downzoning.
no, it's just a change. It's just removing a use
From a zone.
Yeah,
Which is a downside.
And it affects the value.
So that's the value.
Yeah.
Because they have less uses of the property.
but we do have the ability, and we've proven in the past that we would have the ability to do it in court. Be able to.
Maybe we'll get a comment from Mr. Rogers and then Ms. Etienne.
Thank you, Council, to the chair. Peter can provide some backup to this, but the courts will find in favor of councils all the time with zoning. We don't get into zoning, so this is something somebody may try to take a run at us with, but likely not to go anywhere, especially something so broad and so ends up something that has backup in the sense that the OCP says to do. Again, you want to do things carefully. You would always be having talk to the legal counsel, but it's not something that would should sway that decision at the end. I think. Okay,
Ms. Etienne.
Thank you. Further to Mr. Rogers' point, I think we, while it may seem, like I guess a small task to amend the bylaw to include some language, we do want to do this carefully. We do want to take some time to do this. If I were just to speak to resources in terms of staffing over the next several months with the zoning rewrite on the horizon, with council establishing objectives around this and including it in the overall zoning rewrite, would would be reasonable timing. I'm not sure how quickly we could move forward on this independently and then move forward on the proposed or the, I think, established timelines for the zoning rewrite. That would likely get pushed out in favor of doing this in isolation. I do see some benefit in doing the two together. The zoning rewrite will require significant public consultation. If council does establish the objectives around an amendment such as this, we can seek consultation during that session along with everything else we are consulting on regarding the zoning rewrite. So that is an opportunity, and some councillors may not know the extent to the consultation that takes place during the zoning rewrite process. So I just wanted to highlight that as an opportunity.
Okay, so what kind of direction you want from council right now? For this public engagement? That was a question from Mr. Thick. I don't hear a real consensus from council. Like there's not, I really don't sense a clear direction from council to approach this in a specific way. So I'll refer it back to staff for some feedback right now, and then we'll see if we can get somewhere.
If I may, I feel I could suggest something in that, you know, this is a report that council has been waiting for quite some time since the motion was passed in late 2022. It's a lot of information to digest, and we can certainly refer this discussion to a committee of the whole where we felt it would have been most appropriate to bring the first presentation to. I'd like to give council some time to think about what was presented today. It's not necessary to get sort of that clear definitive direction from council on where we go next. So there is an opportunity to refer that. I believe the next meeting is on June 5th.
Okay. Sorry, I was thinking there. I lost my train of thought. So refer this to June 5th. Sorry, say it again.
June 5th, committee of the whole.
June 5th, committee of the whole for discussion. Yeah, great. I was thinking that there was a previous motion from council for detailed information prior to the October 22nd motion as well. So it is something that's been on the table for quite a while.
Through the chair, staff did report back on the detailed information. I believe it was a committee of the whole shortly before this motion was made.
Okay, that's right. They reported on that and then this motion was made, yeah. So, okay. Then we're referring it back to June 6th.
June 5th.
June 5th for further discussion. Okay, that's good.
Question. For me, I'm just not sure what this council hopes to achieve. What the goals are for each individual, whether they want more short-term rentals, they're not bothered, or they want to curtail them.
That's a good point. I mean, I think the consensus I hear is that they do not want more short-term rentals, and they want to sort of control or better control the number of short-term rentals. That seems to be a consensus, but I don't know. Let's go around the table pretty quickly. We can very briefly. What's the goal here? I mean, if you haven't already said it, it's fine. We can do that quick though.
All right, working
We're done.
within our legal parameters, not allowing any new short-term rentals, while allowing existing ones to operate and gently phase out, and then not operate as short-term rentals so that people are not penalized for what they've been doing legally. That's it.
Well, I think Councillor Steer pointed out, it's yes, to curtail short-term rentals, but with the goals of lessening the impact of their proliferation on the housing stock. That's my interest.
Same, sure. I Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. I do feel that if a person is a resident in Tofino and they have a suite that they need to make money on to own their home here, I think it's pretty hard to do in this day and age without some kind of income in short term. Yeah, no. That's what I think, but I don't think that you know, personally, I don't think that it's we should turn residents into commercial properties for investment. And so I think we can stop that. Incentivize long-term rentals.
Yeah, I'd like to see a reduction in them. I think moving towards having them as a primary residence. People who are purchasing a house are getting mortgages based on what they can pay, not based on there being a short-term rental. So if somebody buying a new property to live there, it's not like a necessity for them, and they might be less inclined to do that and more inclined to like rent it out to somebody long-term. But I guess the option is there if, you know, things change hands or something falls out of compliance, but it's still zoned for that, then we say, hey, it has to be an owner now. So hopefully those start to change hands a bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mayor Law said it well. I'd like to see like this for as homes primarily and possibly a reduction, but not like an elimination of them, because it's really difficult to live here and pay your mortgage. And that's about it. I think that's what it said.
And my concern has always been how it affects the long-term rental market. My concern about curtailing them is, you know, if some young people actually do manage to afford a house, then we say you can't do a short-term rental because we're curtailing it now. So you're not giving them that opportunity unless they go and buy an existing short-term rental.
You're okay with it if they're a resident in the house, then you say, yeah, they should have the opportunity to run a short-term rental.
Yeah, but I think that's going to be really hard to enforce.
I would be in favor of if the fees were high enough to cover enforcement, so that we could actually say, hey, you can only get your business license if it has been inspected each year. Obviously, that's a lot for one person to handle on top of like all the actual like physical businesses as well. But if there's a way of kind of doing that.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's read the motion. Let's refer it to for discussion. Did that help, Councillor McMaster, hearing all council's position? Does that help for staff hearing a general feedback from this council where they're at? All right. Then let's refer it to, do we need to make a motion to refer it to the June 6th? Okay, well then I'll make a motion from the chair to refer this for further discussion at the June 6th meeting. All second by Councillor Steer, all in favor? Okay, and then let's do the recommendation. I'll move from the chair that the staff report short-term rental business licensing and community engagement dated April 25th, 2023 be received for information. Sorry, Councillor Steer, any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion carried. Thank you. All right, bylaws. Nothing on bylaws. Business initiated by council members. Is there any report back from council members?
We give you a report on our standing committee. We received the minutes of it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we had the standing committee for.
Nope. I don't think so. It's already passed in the.
Oh, yeah.
You can say that we had it and. It's in the consent agenda.
Yeah.
It's okay to provide a report on it.
It's okay to report. I didn't want to get them into talking about what was in the thing. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to update the rest of council to let everybody know that there was $1,000 left over because there was one person that had applied that didn't meet the requirements. So I think we said we were going to put that on to next year. But it's possibly there in case somebody presents to us at some point. Is my understanding.
Yeah, there's $1,000 unspent from Council Grant. So if whenever there's something emergent, we might leave it there or it might roll over to next budget surplus from.
Thank you, Council. I understand.
Super. Thank you. Any other council business? Seeing none. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure we're going to go into the.
No, I
the
just wanted to
details.
give you that. That seems relevant to future discussions.
That's great. Excellent.
Just one more comment on that process. It was odd that that council grant stream wasn't more oversubscribed. That's unusual.
It's so typical in the past.
Yes.
Great. That's good. Question period. Mr. Shortall, do we have anybody up for questions?
Currently, there's no questions, Mayor Law, but I will do a call to anyone attending online or in person in the council chambers. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, you can do so by using the question and answer function on Zoom. You need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you're speaking to. I'll make a call, calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times, and no questions at this period, or at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shortall. Okay, we're going to move into closed session and let's read from the chair. I move that the meeting be closed in public pursuant to section 90 of the community charter to discuss matters related to 1A, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. 1C, labor relations or other employee relations. 1E, the acquisition, disposition, expropriation of land or improvements. The council considers that disclosure could possibly reasonably and be expected to harm the interests of the municipality. 1K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of municipal service that are at their preliminary stages that, in the view of council, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held public. 1L, discussions with municipal officers and employees respecting municipal objectives, measures, and progress reports for the purposes of preparing an annual report under section 98 annual municipal report. Right, seconded by Councillor Steer. All in favor? Unopposed, motion is carried. We will move into the closed session. We will have a 5-minute recess, 4-minute recess.